Hello, Year 9. Today we're going to be talking about germ theory, which was discovered by Louis Pasteur. And germ theory perhaps is one of the major breakthroughs that happened in the period 1700 to 1900. And as a result, the next few lessons, and we'll probably revisit this in September, will be about germ theory, because this is a really significant or an important event that really changed a lot of things in medicine, and as a result, progress started to happen at a much quicker rate than had done in the previous time periods. That's our Renaissance and the medieval time period. So Louis Pasteur, and later we'll talk about Robert Koch, who also developed the work of Louis Pasteur. But today we're just going to focus on this lovely gentleman here, Louis Pasteur. But let's just quickly remind ourselves that at the start of the 1700s, lots of things had already changed. So the four humours, as we know, very dominant during the medieval period, started to fizzle out during the Renaissance period and was pretty much out during the start of the 1700s. Miasma was still in existence. Some people still believed in miasma, though it was becoming a lot less popular than it had been in the Renaissance and in the medieval period. However, something new that was around, so a change, is this idea of spontaneous generation. Now, scientists in the early 18th century developed this theory of spontaneous generation as an alternative to theories like the four humours. Improvements in the quality of lenses used in microscopes, so they were able to look closer at decaying matter or things that were rotting under the microscopes, meant that scientists now could see microbes. Okay, a microbe, which you looked at last lesson as a definition, is any living organism that is too small to see without a microscope. Microbes do include bacteria, and they could see lots of microbes on decaying matter using these kind of much better microscopes that have been developed. However, most people at the start of the 1700s believed that these microbes were the product of decay rather than the cause of it. Until Louis Pasteur. So Louis Pasteur was French, so he's a French physician, but actually he didn't really look, he's a French scientist, sorry, and he wasn't really looking at humans per se. He really worked in the wine industry, and that's really where his background lay. But how did Louis Pasteur come to discover germ theory? In 1860, the French Academy of Science challenged scientists to come up with evidence to either prove or disprove the theory of spontaneous generation. And as I've mentioned before, by the middle of the 19th century, so we're talking the 1800s here, microscopes had improved, and it was possible to magnify substances such as microbes. And because of this, Louis Pasteur, a French scientist, was able to observe unwanted microbes in wine and vinegar, which turned both liquids bad. Pasteur published the results of experiments in 1861, and he called his discovery germ theory. So that is a key date, 1861, the discovery of germ theory. So that sentence there, Pasteur published his findings in 1861, he called his discovery germ theory, is really a key sentence which I would recommend that you write down. You really need to know this. Any question about germ theory, you're going to need the date, and you're going to need to know about Louis Pasteur. Okay. Pasteur had proved that the idea of spontaneous generation was wrong because decay did not happen to sterilise matter. Okay, sterilise means clean, without bacteria that was left undisturbed. Instead, something in the air was causing the decay. Pasteur also theorised that as germs were causing decay, they might also be causing disease in the human body. He observed one particular type of microorganism killing off France's silkworm population, which seemed to prove his theory. However, he did not publish this germ theory of infection until 1878, so some time afterwards. So in that time period, so 1861 to 1878, really, Pasteur was just theorising. He was predicting. He hadn't actually grounded it down in practical evidence at this point. So he was making a guess about what bacteria or microbes did. But he'd yet to be able to provide evidence. And this meant, therefore, it was difficult to try and sell or try and convince other people that his work was right. And we can see that happening in Britain. To begin with, Pasteur's work had almost no impact at all on British ideas about the cause of illness and disease. He was not a doctor, he was a scientist. And his work focused on decay and spoiled food and not disease. So people were like, why should we listen to him? He does not know about the human body. He really was looking at wine specifically, but not the human body. So people didn't take him seriously. In Britain, the theory of spontaneous generation continued to be important until the 1870s. It was promoted by, Dr. Henry Bastien, who was one of the most powerful doctors in England at that time. Because he was so well respected, and again, remember, he was a doctor that knew about the human body, people did not want to believe in Pasteur, as this would undermine Henry Bastien's belief in spontaneous generation. However, there were some scientists, John Lister, and we've not come across him yet, but we will be later, and he is an English scientist, and he did start to look towards, or look at the work produced by Pasteur, and made this link to the infection problems he was having in his surgery with patients that he was operating on. Another scientist who promoted the link between microbes and disease was John Tyndall. Again, we're going to talk about him later. And he had discovered that there was a small organic particle in the air. However, in January 1870, he gave a lecture linking his discovery with Pasteur's germ theory and Lister's work on wound infection. Tyndall theorised that dust particles carried the germs that cause disease. However, Tyndall also was not a doctor, he was a physicist, and the medical world trusted Bastien's beliefs rather than Tyndall's theory. So again, we can see that Dr. Henry Bastien, because he was a doctor, was looking at the human body, was much more greatly believed in than the scientists or physicists who were theorising about germ theory at the time. And Lister's ideas were also doubted as he could not prove his theory, although microscopes meant that microbes were visible. There was lots of them present in the blood or the wound. Doctors could not yet identify what they were or what role they played. The gut is a good example of why they had problems. I've got a little diagram here at the bottom of the page, and you can see on this page here, you can see that the little red dots are blood, and the blue ones here are, the blue and the yellow here are microbes. And this is a kind of close-up of a wound here. And it's very hard, there's so many of them here, it's very hard to identify, microbes are in every part of us. Every time we pick up something, every time we eat something, there are microbes around. It's very difficult to, even under a microscope, to identify which of these microbes cause disease. It's some time in the future, from Pasteur's time, that scientists were able to look at these different microbes and be able to identify which ones cause specific disease. At this moment in time, in the 1860s, people were looking under the microscope and could just see a huge array of microbes, and not all of them will cause disease. So it was very difficult for people to understand what caused disease and what didn't cause disease. And therefore, as a result of this and the lack of evidence here, Pasteur's theory had limited impact on Britain. And this was coupled because attitudes among doctors meant people refused to recognise the link between germs and disease, even though the link was correct, and people did not want to believe in work that would undermine Dr. Henry Bastin, who was a doctor, and believe in scientists and physicists' work instead. So we can definitely see, though, that there was a change, and we will be talking about this over the next couple of lessons. So we have this idea of the old. So at the start of the 1700s, we had this idea of the spontaneous generation theory, which claimed that rotting matter created microbes. We have a picture of decaying matter here. But the new idea was Pasteur's germ theory, claimed that microbes cause decay and were not created by rotting matter at all. So we can see the slight shift between spontaneous generation and germ theory here. Okay. Thank you very much for listening.